Highline is more than schools. It's people. Students, educators, leaders, families, and neighbors, each with a story to tell. These are our people, and these are our stories. Welcome to the Promise Podcast, where we share how the Highline Promise comes to life. Every student is known by name, strength, and need, and graduates prepare for the future they choose. I'm your host, Superintendent Ivan Duran. Welcome to the Promise Podcast. Today's guest is Dr. Susan Enfield. Dr. Enfield, welcome. So let's just go ahead and start with, we already know your name, but why don't you tell us about your current role and how you're connected to Highline.
Thank you, Dr. Duran. I am currently the Executive Director for the Center for Educational Leadership at the University of Washington, Go Dogs. And I am 6 months into that role. Prior to that, I had 3 superintendencies, but my longest tenured superintendency was my decade serving here in Highline as superintendent.
That's great. Well, welcome to the podcast. So glad
Thank you. So
you're
happy
here.
to be here.
I was excited to have you on here because I wouldn't be here in Highline if it wasn't for you.
I don't know about that, but I'm
no,
just glad you're here.
Deep gratitude to the support you gave me, guidance you gave me as I was even seeking this job, but thank you.
Absolutely.
As you think about your current role that you have now and you think about your role here in Highline, what are some of the big differences you're seeing? They're both leadership roles, but very different perspectives, I'm sure.
Yeah, it's really interesting because CEL, as we affectionately refer to the Center for Educational Leadership, and by the way, oh, how the tables have turned. You, Dr. Duran, are on my advisory board. So.
That's very true.
CEL was a longtime partner here in Highline. I also worked with them when I was in Seattle Public Schools. So I've worked with CEL for years, but now I'm on the other side of it. I was on the partner side, now I'm leading CEL. And so it's work that I believe in deeply and that I'm familiar with. But of course, doing the work as the CEL partner, not the district partner, is definitely a shift. I think so much, I always say that I learned so much from my time in Highline as a leader, as an educator, just as a person. And I think a lot of those lessons served me well in my executive director role at CEL. But it's just nice to see how the worlds converge and how so much of what I have done in my career as an educational leader is helpful in the role at CEL, and how much I have to learn. It's actually fun to be approaching 57 years old and take on a fresh challenge, right? To having been in the superintendent chair for 13 years to all of a sudden say, detour. So it's been good.
Yeah, but that's probably, having that experience as superintendent is probably a great perspective to bring to the other districts that you're working with, because you can talk about the systems level work that you know is essential for any strategy work that you're trying to achieve at the
100%.
schools. So
You got it.
That's great. Well, this podcast is called, Living Our Promise, because we have a promise here in Highline that you're very familiar with, and that's to know every student by name, strength, and need so they graduate prepared for the future they choose. So can you talk a little bit around just where did that all come from? Where did this whole idea of the promise come from? And it came under your leadership, and just love to hear you share about that.
Yeah, and first of all, I think people who have been in Highline for some time would say that it's more than a mission or vision. It's actually become more than a promise. I think it's fair to say it's really become the DNA of the system, and the way in which you've continued to deepen that has been really beautiful and remarkable to watch. But it originated from my time, first of all, as a high school English, ELL, and journalism teacher, where I would say to my kids at the beginning of the school year, I will know all of your first names by the end of the first week of school, and I won't use seating charts. And I urge you to defy human nature and not sit in the same seat every day. They didn't do that. They always sat in the same seat. Because I felt that how could I ask these young people to come in and afford me any respect if I didn't give them the most basic respect of knowing their name? And we know the research of how many kids in high school can go through the day with no adult in their building. I know it's not true here in Highline, but there are places where kids can go through the day and no one calls them by their name. And then as I became an administrator in education, I felt like it was my job to make sure that we knew our children by name and need, to greet them by name, but then to figure out what is it that they need from us. And then when I arrived in Highline in 2012, the leadership team was reading a book by Dr. Yvette Jackson called The Pedagogy of Confidence. And it's a wonderful book, highly recommend it. But to boil it down to its essence, it's what if we treated every child as gifted? And I was in a meeting, it was actually before I think I officially started, and I said, what if we said that we're going to promise to know every student by name, strength, and need. So it's not just what they need, it's what are the gifts they bring, because we know all of
That's
our children
beautiful.
come with
Yeah.
assets.
Mhm.
And that was really how it was born. And then originally, it was every student by name, strength, and need, so they graduate for college, career, and citizenship. Because we're a learning organization, when we went to refresh our strategic plan a few years in, we heard from some of our families that the term citizenship was off-putting.
Mm.
They didn't see themselves in that. And I'll confess, I had a moment of a gut punch of how could I have not thought of that myself? But I was so glad that we got that information,
Mhm.
because we knew that we had to go back and make a change, because we wanted every family member to see themselves and their children in that promise. So we changed it to every student by name, strength, and need. That stays the same. So they graduate prepared for the future they choose.
Okay. That's
So,
a great
yeah,
adjustment.
yeah.
I think that's so important, because now we talk a lot about the promise being our aspirational vision. It's what we're working towards. And Highline doesn't have a vision statement, doesn't have a mission statement. We have a promise. So the work continues. And even when I was interviewing for the job, I remember being down in the boardroom, and I used the promise on the backdrop a couple different times. It just said, it resonates with me deeply, because my experience as a high school student, that wasn't true. My friends knew me by name, strength, and need, but not necessarily my teachers. And
Yeah.
some of that was because of my own behaviors that were going on. But I truly believe that if we do know students by name, strength, and need, it just helps us to ensure that we're meeting their needs at a deeper level.
And can I say, it speaks to your leadership and who you are as a person, that not only did that resonate with you and does it align with your values, but that you saw how important that was to this community. And a lot of leaders want to come in and make everything their own.
Mhm.
And you came in and said, no, this is too important. Not everyone would do that. And I think that speaks to who you are as a leader, and why I'm so happy that you chose Highline.
Yeah, well, I was grateful Highline chose me also. Matter of fact, I remember when I first was coming here to Washington, I asked around, where are the districts that are doing some innovation work? And it was Highline, and it was Bellingham up
You came
north,
into one of our
So,
cabinet
yeah,
meetings back in the day.
came and visited, got to see how a cabinet meeting was run, got to see some of the work there. And so, yeah, I've always been deeply attracted to it. And I think it's so important in transitions, which I still will say, I think we had probably one of the best transitions that I ever experienced in my professional
Absolutely.
career. But those transitions are important, because there's always good work that's been going on. And it's important just to keep it going. And the promise is one of those things that I think is timeless. It's going to keep inspiring us to
Absolutely.
do amazing work. So this morning I had opportunity to work with my students from the superintendent student leadership team, and I did some work with them around values-based leadership and use the 5 leadership practices from the Leadership Challenge. One of those is called Encourage the Heart. And, we continue to do a lot of Encourage the Heart, which is basically the idea of, honoring, recognizing people for the work that they do, and to do it publicly is what a lot of the research talks about, that it not only elevates the individual, it lifts up the entire community. And so prior to my time in Highline, we had duckies. And there are still ducks everywhere. We have one of them in front of us right now, and people still have these,
Yeah.
in their offices. They're very proud of them. I've heard different origin stories of the duckies, but love to hear from your perspective now. How did the duckies come into be here in Highline?
Oh, sure. But I will start by saying, I think every leader who spends so much of their life in one place, when they leave, they want to see things go to the next level. And I thank you for moving from duckies to classy pins. It's definitely an upgrade, so well done. So you can blame my father for the ducks. My father has called me Duck since I was little. As I said, I'm coming up on my 57th year, and if he walked in this room right now, he would call me Duck. And it was actually when I was in Seattle and became interim superintendent, he said, you should give out duckies. And I'm like, corny, Dad. And then when I got here, I thought, it's not a bad idea, because, you mention Encourage the Heart, and you talk about the fact that people have a fundamental need to be seen and appreciated. And so the duckies became a symbol of commitment to our promise, but also of appreciation, that any staff member could nominate another staff member, and they would get a ducky and a photo. And again, it really isn't about the duck or the pin. It's about the fact that I have a colleague who sees me. I have a superintendent who sees me. That matters.
Yeah.
It just matters. And I think it creates a culture of gratitude. And we know what the research says about gratitude. It's good for the soul, it's good for your health. So the more that we can make that a part of just our daily practice, I think the better off we all are.
Yeah, I agree completely. I think it's so important to honor, recognize people for the hard work that we do. And even now, we do live in the promise pin. So yes, we do have these new pins that we're giving away, and we'll have them in some of our meeting structures. There's always time for people to honor and recognize, and it just brings so much joy into the room. It's just a really wonderful experience to have. And actually we receive emails from staff members who will often email their principals and say, hey, I want to honor and recognize this person at our next staff meeting, and they CC me on many of those just so I can see that. And I love that,
Yeah.
to know that it's continuing and we shifted a little bit so that anyone in the district can
that.
honor
Yeah.
and recognize somebody. And we buy the pins by the thousands, and
I
we
love it.
distribute them as needed. And
It's such a reminder too. It takes so little to make people feel appreciated.
yeah.
It doesn't have to be a big fancy gift. It's just a symbol that I see you, I appreciate you.
Yeah, and I don't have my lanyard on me now, but people wear them on their lanyards. They wear them
Oh yeah, I
proud,
see them everywhere.
People see them.
I'm
so-
wearing mine right now.
Yeah, I got to bring a really quick story into this too. Is one of the person that's continually come up on our podcast is Gil Parson. We probably have to think about having him. But when we first started the pinning process, I wore a pin around just because I had some and I was wearing on my lapel, just like you have on yours. And Gil came up to me one day. He said, "Hey, who'd you get that pin from?" And I said, I just picked it up, just put it on so I'd have it. He says, "You can't be wearing that." And so it just made me laugh so hard because that's Gil. Gil would say something like that to me. So in the end, I actually ended up giving him a pin for one of the things that he did, and he honored and recognized me for some
Who
work
does
that I
that Gil
did.
think
So-
he is?
So I legit now have one from Gil that I carry proudly because I earned it. I just
I
didn't
love
pick it up
that.
off the
I
shelf.
love
So,
that.
okay, well, let's do a little shift now and let's just talk about the future. I know you're continue to impact, students and our educational system in many ways. But when you think about the future for yourself, for our students, and for our community, what gives you hope these days?
So, a few things. I think those of us who commit our lives to service and public education always find hope and inspiration in our students and our children and young people. That's why we do what we do. And so I think I still have the opportunity leading walkthroughs and doing other things where I'm in schools and seeing students, and that's always a joy. I will also say, though, I find great inspiration and find hope in our superintendents. Having been in that seat for 13 years, I know the joys and the challenges that come with it. And I think it is harder than ever to be a leader in any capacity today, given the challenges we're facing. But I think superintendents face some particular challenges. And I know that people like you and our friends and colleagues who are in the chair right now continue to show up every day believing the impossible is possible and working to make it a reality for our children. And doing it not only without a lot of recognition, but in some cases really swimming upstream. Superintendents face a lot of criticism, a lot of challenges, and I just so admire people like you who continue to show up and lead this work. I think it's some of the most important work right now in this nation. And so I will say thank you for sitting in that chair and doing the important work of leading this wonderful system.
Yeah, I agree with you completely. There's so many different challenging aspects of the job, and just uncertainties around our national picture right now and what's happening with federal funding. There's a lot of things that we're worried about with immigration policies and how they're shifting and changing that deeply impacts our families. And, it definitely requires, thick skin in some cases, as well as just a really big heart to lead this work, because it is all about service. It is about ensuring that we're doing everything possible that our students and our staffs have what they need to be successful.
That's right.
I'm grateful for everyone that leads the work, and there's always opportunities to improve, and really believe that we're into the business of creating possibilities for
The best
for people.
leaders are learners too.
Yeah. So I know now, you're still resident of Highline, still in the community, and really grateful because you're on our Highline Schools Foundation, one of our trustees. So thank you for being that. And
bet.
so when you think about our students here in Highline, what are some of the dreams you have for them, knowing that you're still impacting them just in a different way?
Yeah, so I will say part of leadership transition is being helpful but not being in the way. So I thought, well, I can give back to the community and help Highline by being on the board, and it'll stay out of Ivan's hair.
You've
So,
never been in
and,
the
and
way.
both Fred, who leads and I were both like, is this okay with you? So,
Absolutely.
but I love the foundation. I'm proud to serve on the board. You know, I'm sure you've heard me say that every child, young person in Highline is brilliant, beautiful, and brimming with promise. And I've always said that the language we use to talk to, with, and about our children matters. They internalize it.
Yeah.
They hear it. And I say that, and I'm going to take a minute to emphasize, in heated moments where people are very passionate about whatever the issue is, I think we need to be mindful that our children are listening, and that I believe we have a responsibility to check ourselves when talking about other people's children.
Yeah.
And I want our children to hear that we believe in them, but talk is cheap. I then want to see the systems in place for them to chart their own course. So that notion of students graduating prepared for the future they choose, you know, how, and I know you do this in so many ways in Highline, how are you putting those opportunities out there and removing the barriers so that students truly have options?
Yeah.
And I just think I want our students to see themselves the way we see them.
That's great.
Right? Which is that we believe in them, they have such potential, and they can go on and do great things. So let's hope that they see themselves as we see them.
Oh, that's wonderful. I had this image in the presentation with the students this morning around characteristics of leaders who I'd admired, and it's an image of a cat, but the shadow is actually a lion.
Yeah.
You know, and it's just that idea that, you know, there's so much more there.
There is so much, and I'm so glad that you have the student leadership team. That was always one of my favorites. I will also say, too, it's very humbling to work in service of children, young people, and families. And I think that today, leadership that exemplifies service and humility is sadly all too rare.
Yeah.
And I love seeing it on full display here in Highline, and not just you leading it, but everywhere across the system and in the community. That's what our children need to see. That's the kind of leadership I want our children to aspire to.
Yeah,
so that
that's
when they're in
beautiful.
charge to make our world a better place, that's how they approach leadership.
I agree. I was talking with our cabinet team last week in one of our meetings around just the privilege we have, you know, that this is really a privilege to be able to serve here and the work that we do. One of the terms that we've been talking a lot around is tender. It's tenderness. I mean, it really is a care that we have to provide to, you know, the work that we're doing, and really see it as, I call it sacred work, you know, because we are influencing the future in ways that we can't even imagine, you know, and we have to create these possibilities for our students to be able to, one, think about what their future could be, connect to their passions and their interests, and then just do everything we can to ensure that comes true for them.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's the right work. and
Couldn't agree more. It's
the
the work.
best work. It's the best work. Yeah, I can't think. I've often said I can't think of myself doing anything right now.
Yeah.
I know I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be, and
Yep.
and love the work. And
Yep.
you know, some days it's definitely challenging, but you know, as you said, being with the students today and just hearing some of their stories and seeing how values connected to them, and hearing them talk about a value of respect, and students naming spirituality as one of their values. I mean, that's valuable work to hear and see, and just know that, you know, we do influence our students in many ways, and that they just are so much potential there. It's just wonderful to have
there's
the
a-
experience.
And I don't know if you know this story, but I think it's relevant. When I interviewed in Highline, part of the interview process was to go visit a classroom. And I went to a social studies classroom at Evergreen. It was then one of the small schools, but Evergreen High School. And I went in and I asked the students, tell me what the new superintendent needs to know. The hands shot up. The first person said, we need more advanced courses. Another one said, if you keep raising pay for play, I have friends who are going to drop out because they can't afford it, and that's what keeps them in school. I had another one who said, just because we don't have a lot doesn't mean we don't want to learn and be successful and do other things.
Oh, that's
It was a
great.
mandate.
Yeah.
And that notion of listening to our students and frankly being reminded that we are in service to them, that they're our why, that was what hooked me. And after I was fortunate enough to get the job, I went back and I thanked them.
Oh, that's
And I said,
great.
you're the reason that I took this job, and I'm going to do my very best to live up to the clear expectations that you set
Oh, that's
for
a
the
great story.
superintendent.
That's
Yeah.
great. Thank you for sharing that. And you did do amazing work here, and I was grateful again.
It was
to
a
be
great
able to
team.
transition
Team
into
effort.
it. So, okay. All right. Well, let's do a shift here for one of our final questions. But what's something you're reading, watching, or listening to right now that you would recommend to our listeners?
Yes, so I am reading A Different Kind of Power. It's Jacinda Ardern's, the former Prime Minister of New Zealand,
Oh,
who led New Zealand during the pandemic, actually got New Zealand's numbers down to almost zero during the pandemic. She, and also was pregnant when she assumed the Prime Minister
oh, gee,
with
wow.
her first child. And she's just an amazing example, to your point, of leadership being about service above self, about being mission driven. She was so clear in what she wanted to do and why and how she wanted to go about doing it. And specifically, Ivan, I think you would appreciate very much about the heart and humanity and how we treat people. I am. I don't fangirl too much, but I fangirl over her. And I actually am, I've signed up to attend an institute at Harvard this summer because she's on faculty there and she's supposed to be there. Oh,
Yeah.
I bought that book hard copy to get it signed. Like, that's how much
You've been
fangirl.
carrying that Sharpie with
But
you.
I think it's,
Yeah.
I always want to hear from leaders I admire and just learn from, but it's also, it goes into her life experience, because the leaders we are today is who we were, growing up and what shaped us. And I just think we have a lot to learn from leaders like her.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
I think it sounds like a great book. Thank
Yeah,
you so much
it's
for
been
sharing
good so
that.
far.
So again, Susan, thank you so much for being here on the Promise Podcast. So appreciate you taking the time, and just appreciate you in so many different ways.
Right back at you, Ivan, and I'm always cheering, always in your corner.
That's great. Thank you. All right. Well, that's it for this episode of the Promise Podcast. These stories remind us that Highline is built by people, students, staff, families, and community members, each making the promise real in their own way. Don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss our next episode. I'm your host, Dr. Ivan Duran. Thanks for listening, and I look forward to sharing more stories with you soon.